I am Alice of KHR Arts and Cloud Orchid Publishing, and today we're going to talk about what if your publisher dies? So this is a really difficult topic. It's one that most people don't even think about. It's one that I honestly didn't think about until recently. It's a very scary topic, but it's an important one. So what do I mean by this? It can be very literal, or it can be, what if your publisher folds? This happened where my partner Neil had some of his books published under the publishing company Ring of Fire, and the owner of the publishing company literally died. Human being literally kaput. And he owned the company, and it wasn't passed on to anybody. And all of these authors suddenly had to scramble and be like, what do we do with our books? And it was a whole process for him to, one, be able to even figure out the legality of his book titles of, do they revert back to him? Are they just in limbo forever? What happens to them? And that's a thing that people also don't think about with traditional publishing, is with traditional publishing, you are signing away your books to that company. They own your books. You don't. So you can't just wake up one day, let's say you decide to have your books published by, Oompa Loompa Publishing House, and then Oompa Loompa Publishing House folds, and it's in your contract that Oompa Loompa Publishing House owns your books forever and ever and ever in perpetuity. That means that you can't just necessarily take those books and then go publish them somewhere else. Like, you have to have lawyers look over that. It also means that if your books are published under Oompa Loompa House, you can't just be like, I'm not getting enough money from Oompa Loompa House, so I'm going to go self-publish them on Amazon. You can absolutely get sued by Oompa Loompa House for that. They can take you to court over that, and you will lose because you signed a contract that they own that, so you are stealing their content. It no longer belongs to you. Some of them do say that, like, after X amount of years, the ownership reverts back to you and you can do whatever you want with it. There are also contracts where it's if they haven't been able to make it successful, like if they haven't been able to make X amount of sales from it, it reverts back to you and you can do whatever you want with it. This is why it's so important when you get traditionally published. Read your contract. Read your contracts. Know what you're signing up for. Make sure you understand what happens with your story. Make sure you understand where you stand on ownership of your story. It's very important because these things do happen. The owners of publishing companies die. Publishing companies will just completely, just gone. Just blow up, fold, just completely gone one day without warning. They'll get bought out by other publishing houses. Any number of things can just happen all of a sudden without your consent, without your knowledge, and just suddenly one day, oh, this company doesn't exist anymore. Thanks for playing. And what do you do? And in Neil's case, his book contracts got bought out by another publishing house. And, oh my God, that poor man. I love him to pieces, but oh my goodness. That publishing house also folded. Now his books are somewhere else. But this kind of stuff can happen where it can just be like a series of unfortunate events of ridiculousness where your books will just change hands and you're like, okay, I guess I'm over here now. And all of that impacts your sales and your ability to do stuff with your books. So like for the longest time, he's been in just absolute like book publishing purgatory where technically his books are owned by this publishing company, but because they're still solidifying the legality because they used to be owned by this publishing company, but the publisher died. They're like, well, we still have some legal nonsense behind the scenes we have to take care of. So he couldn't order any of his books wholesale to sell at conventions. And he couldn't advertise them because there were no books to sell online because legality stuff. And then that publishing house ended up folding. There's somewhere else and he has to repeat the process and it's horrible. At the end of the day, publishing is a business. So everything that can happen in the business world can happen to your books. Like mergers and conglomerates and buying out and bankruptcy and all that stuff. Publishing is a business. All of that stuff happens. So you have to be prepared to know what to do if it happens to you. And this hits a little bit home for me because while Neil has been going through all of that, just series of nonsense with his books, I recently took over Cloud Orchid Publishing. Cloud Orchid Publishing now completely belongs to me. It was a joint venture between me and my best friend, Brian Thompson. Now, that's not to say that Brian Thompson is like not a part of Cloud Orchid Publishing anymore or anything like that. He's not like kicked out or anything like that. It's because of Brian's journey with, he had head and neck cancer and he fought so hard and he actually reached remission. But then he started to go downhill and we're like, what's happening? And then he got diagnosed with brain lymphoma. And he's currently fighting the good fight on that now. And y'all, that kind of cancer, you start to get your affairs in order real fast because you don't know what's going to happen. Tomorrow is not guaranteed. And that's a big thing I'm struggling with in my personal life. I mean, hell, that's the thing that Brian's really struggling with in his personal life for obvious reasons. And one of the steps that we took was transferring over Cloud Orchid Publishing is mine now. I am running it, and I still plan on sharing it with Brian because we built it together, but for all intents and purposes, it's my publishing house now. And thankfully, like, it's all my stuff anyway. There isn't a real whole lot that I have to do differently. It's more so kind of like a formality sort of thing, and there's a lot of behind the scenes work that I have to do now with that. Now I do everything. There was a lot of behind the scenes work that Brian did on my behalf. So even something like that, where it's like best case scenario for the least amount of horribleness and crazy that has to happen, it's still a shift. That it's you never know what could happen with your publishing company, whether it's you're a part of it, or whether your books are a part of it, or whatever. They're businesses. And so that's something that people need to be aware of. And I myself wasn't aware of that until it happened to Neil, and then it happened to me. And most of my friends that I've talked to, like, it blew their minds. They're like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do if that happens to me. And that's also part of why in my last video where I talk about, is traditional publishing viable anymore? Is that traditional publishing is becoming less viable, partially because the industry is kind of imploding on itself with self-publishing and AI and just all the nonsense that so many publishing houses are folding. So many are filing bankruptcy. So many of them are merging. So many of the people that own smaller houses are just like, I give up. I can't do this anymore. Whatever the reason, so many of them are just going up in smoke overnight. And so many authors are left holding the bag. And more than ever, it is so important to have that plan. Read your contracts. Have a plan B. Make sure that you understand what's going to happen legally in a court of law. What is going to happen with the ownership of your book. All of that is stuff that you need to plan for, because as much as we would love to live in a world where you just publish your book and it's a book and you don't have to think about it, that's not a reality anymore. So it's a somber thing to have to talk about. It's a scary thought to have, but it's an important thing that we all need to start planning for. And a big part of that answer is a lot of people are just like, I'm not going to plan for that. And that's yet another one of the many reasons on the list for why people are choosing self-publishing is, again, so that they can maintain control of their books, that they don't have to worry about, what if my publisher goes under? That they can just be like, well, I'm in charge of my books, and that in itself, I mean, technically, if you go 6 feet under, it's no longer your problem. But there's also that problem, too, of what happens if, when you eventually kick the bucket. What happens to your books? Do you care? Do you want something to happen when that happens with your books? Planning in advance for that too, because again, publishing is a business. And especially if your books are making a lot of money, you want to make sure that that stewardship and that money is in the right hands. So that's also something that you have to plan for, is what happens when you're no longer here? What happens to your books? And that's the thing that a lot of people are facing today, is there's a lot of authors that are literally aging out, bye-bye, taking a dirt nap. And a lot of their families are like, we don't know what to do with their books. There's legality snafus. They never got access to them. Do you have information anywhere that, once you die, that people would be able to access your account to be able to even log in to look at your books? Like, all of that stuff is stuff to consider. And I mean, that's the journey that I'm on right now, is figuring out, okay, I have been passed the baton. I own all this stuff, me, myself, and I now. What do I do if something happens to me, myself, and I? So it's an important thing to ask yourself. It's an important thing to sit with, and it's an important thing to start planning for. So I hope y'all found this video helpful. If you did, please be sure to give it a like. And if you're new, subscribe. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.